Okay, we are live now.
Okay.
Uh, Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's discussion. Today, we will be talking about the book Skin, A Natural History. Uh, I'm glad to announce that the author of this book, Dr. Nina Jablonski, is with us today. Hello, Nina. Good morning.
Hello, Khan. It's very lovely to be with you.
Oh, thanks. And with me today, Kaustuv Odhikari would be the co-host as well. Just to give you some introduction to the audience, Dr. Nina Jablonski is the Even Pugh University Professor of the Penn State University. She is an expert on human skin, the evolution of human, and she's an anthropologist, paleobiologist. She also writes. She has two books, very famous and renowned books, widely accepted. One is The Skin that I already have told you, this book that we will be talking about this book today. And one of her another book is Living Color, the Biological and Social Meaning of Skin. Nina, I will ask some of the very general questions at first so that the audience and whoever with us today can have some background of what we are talking about. Some of the question could be you all probably have already explained in your book, but I will ask anyway.
Sure.
So the first question is, why have you become interested in human skin, the diversity of human color, these things?
This really was an interesting research program for me. It started, like many things in science, by accident. I never set out to study the evolution of human skin or skin color, but this research program started in the 1990s when I was still quite a young researcher. And I realized that there was so little good scientific available information on why humans had the skin that we did, mostly naked, coming in different colors, very sensitive, often decorated. It seemed like there was very little in the way of good evolutionary biological information about skin that was known. Also, there was relatively little that had been at least put together about the social meaning of skin, because of course skin is a large organ. It performs a lot of important biological functions for human beings, but it also serves an incredibly important set of communications functions. And so I became more and more interested in this. My original research program was on the evolution of skin color, why human skin comes in such a wide variety of colors. But when I started to talk to book editors about writing a book on skin color, my very astute editor at the University of California Press many years ago, he said, Nina, you really should write a book first on skin in general, the whole thing. Yeah. By way of paving the way for further study of skin color. And so really the book that we're discussing today had its start in that conversation with my editor many years ago. And I'm very glad that I did the books in this sequence, because the skin book really provides a foundation for why our skin is so essential to understanding the human condition. We now know, on the basis of some really very good human genetics and comparative genomics, that skin is the most distinctive of organs, that we in our skin differ more from our non-human primate relatives than we do in other organ systems. So things, even though we think that our brains are so much different, or perhaps our teeth or our muscular systems, in fact, it is the skin that is the most different. And so this is by way of sort of echoing the importance of skin. It is fundamental to understanding the human condition. It's very important for many things that we consider essentially human with respect to our biology. It also is one of the ways in which we announce who we are. We look at one another's skin. We're very visual animals, and so we look not only at the color, but the texture of the skin to determine someone's background, their age. We look at the decorations that they may have or not have. We immediately we look, we make an assessment, and sometimes we make a judgment on the basis of the appearance of skin. So it struck me as a rich topic, and over the years, it has only become richer.
Thank you. So this is probably, you have been asked these questions many times. Why are we naked apes? I mean,
Yes.
why have we lost our fur, our hair, but leaving some hair on our head and almost bare in our body? So
Yes.
I'm just asking why that happened, and also, if can you give me other examples of other animals have done this kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. Humans are unusual among mammals in that we have mostly naked skin. But I want to say mostly because, of course, we have hair on our heads. We also still have tiny hairs on our bodies. So although we usually can't see them or they're quite small, they are actually very important. And I'll come back to that in a moment. The reasons why different groups of mammals have lost their hair are quite different. We can look at a dolphin or a whale, or we can look at a naked mole rat. These mammals have lost their fur, their hair, for different reasons. The aquatic mammals have lost their hair because the naked skin provides a lot of streamlining for their diving and long periods of submerged behavior. The naked mole rats that are subterranean have lost their hair because they no longer require the same kind of thermal protection living quite far distance underground. But human nakedness is, well, first of all, I should say that this is not sort of completely proven, but we have a robust hypothesis that we lost most of our hair because of the importance of keeping cool under hot conditions in our African homeland. We evolved as a lineage separate from chimpanzees, and really up through the early history of Homo sapiens, we evolved in equatorial Africa, and under conditions of hot equatorial heat, as well as conditions of high exertion, we lost our hair. Now, a lot of people say, well, there are a lot of mammals that live in equatorial Africa that run around and have lots of hair. But the problem with humans is that we appear to have had, especially in early days of the genus Homo, the early ancestors of Homo sapiens, we were more active during more of the day, and we had the only mechanism available to us for keeping cool was through the skin. We don't have the ability to pant like dogs and other carnivores do. We can't lose a lot of heat through respiration, but we can lose a lot of heat from the surface of our skin through convective and evaporative and radiative skin loss of heat from the surface. And so this has become more important as we have gone on in history, to be able to liberate excess body heat under hot environmental conditions through the skin. Although you can liberate some body heat when you have a lot of hair, you overheat more quickly because hair is a good thermal insulator, even if you have a relatively thin coat of hair. So to make a long story short, we lost more of our obvious thick body hair and developed more eccrine, watery sweat glands that help to produce moisture on the surface of our skin that helps to keep us cool, especially when we're moving, walking, or running in a hot environment. So this is a hypothesis. I would like to say it's a pretty well-tested hypothesis at this time. We have retained tiny little hairs, as it turns out, because those hairs, and more specifically the hair follicles at the base of the hairs, are really important for repair of our skin. So we couldn't afford to lose everything because we would lose our skin's ability to repair itself as a result of wounds. So we still have tiny, almost invisible hairs on most of our bodies. We also retain hair on the top of our heads, although in men there is some hair loss during age. Occasionally in women. We also have hair under our arms and in our groins. The hair on the surface of our head, again, appears to have been retained probably in order to help protect the top of the head from direct sun exposure and from a lot of direct overheating. It turns out, and one of my graduate students is finishing her dissertation on this topic right now, it turns out that hair, especially curly hair, is a remarkably good insulator. It helps to protect the surface of the head, and it also basically from excess heating from direct solar insolation. So that's a long answer. Mammals lost their hair for a variety of reasons. We appear to have lost it mostly for purposes of temperature regulation.
Thank you. It is a very nice answer and very detailed, and most of the things are very clear to me. So I have one interesting question. I mean, interesting to me. The human skin color is very diverse.
Yes.
And there is a reason for that. The ultraviolet ray, the intensity of it throughout the globe, and it's directly related to that. So there are some climate or environment or these kind of factors
Yes.
For making this kind of diversity. I'm just wondering, can you see this kind of diversity in other animal skins as well?
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, we do, insofar as we tend to see more darkly pigmented skin and hair of mammals in equatorial mammals, or mammals that live under very high ultraviolet radiation regimes. And we tend to see those animals also in more humid environments. In fact, many generations ago, there was a famous zoological rule called Gloger's rule, to which there are many exceptions. But one of the key features of Gloger's rule is that animals will tend to be darker in their skin and hair closer to the equator, where the sun's radiation is more intense. So there is a general rule. Obviously, we can find exceptions to this, but it is an important generalization.
Thanks. Kaustubh, would you ask some questions?
Yes, Nina, a lot of our audience have asked a question that since people have continued to migrate since the major migrations out of Africa, do you think that people's skin color will continue to evolve?
Yes, it's a great question. And, we have in the history of humans, we've had a few major sort of slow dispersals. If we think about Homo sapiens, in some of the early dispersals out of Africa beginning around 70 to 80,000 years ago, obviously we didn't have wheeled vehicles or sailing ships. Those were slow on foot. People moved around into Eurasia, along the southern coast of Asia, into Southeast Asia. So those occurred at a stately pace by modern standards. Today, and really for the last 500 years, people have moved around at increasingly fast paces over long distances. So although most of us are inside right now, months ago, we could have hopped on an airplane and flown tens of thousands of kilometers into a completely different solar regime within a matter of hours. So do we, in fact, does our skin continue to evolve? No, but our culture does. Mostly, we have compensated for movements of humans through cultural adaptations. So we see people making accommodation to increased or decreased levels of sun. People adopt new behaviors. They stay inside at particular times, or they use parasols to protect themselves from the sun, or they spend more time outdoors. So most of the adaptations that we see are in fact cultural adaptations. It also is important to point out that in modern life, for the most part, we have sort of opted out of natural selection insofar as we have many cultural mechanisms for taking care of one another. We not only have systems of sort of care in the home, but we have institutional systems like clinics and hospitals where people can get cared for. Our ancient ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, didn't have such institutions. And so if we get sick as the result of too much sun exposure or not enough, we can have our needs taken care of. In other words, for the most part, human populations are not subject to natural selection, so that we don't see evolutionary changes, natural selection changes in human pigmentation. But what we do see is a remarkable level of genetic mixing between people, because of course, as they disperse from one place to another, they meet other people from other places, they have children together, and what we see is a mixture of different people and their pigmentation genes, leading to all sorts of new skin colors, genetically novel and novel phenotypically or visually. So this is probably the most interesting trend that we see in modern human life, is that people move around fast, and people from very different UV regimes and ancestries come together, often have children, and those children have new pigmentation gene combinations as well as new appearances.
Another question a lot of our audiences have had is the fact that, in South Asia, for example, that there's a lot of colorism in the sense
Yes.
of a preference for white skin color
Yes.
and skin lightening products. So do you think that there has been any biological reason for some people preferring light skin color, or is it entirely arising from, say, 18th century European racist ideas?
Well, what's really interesting here is that this is in South Asia, the preference for lightness goes far deeper than the era of European colonialism, because when we look at the early, even pre-Hindu literature in India, we see a lot of discussion of the varna of the person that is associated with their inner constitution. So the color of the skin and the inner constitution become related, and the superiority of the lighter color, the sort of the moral and cultural superiority, becomes very deeply ingrained in South Asian culture. Now, what's interesting here is that at least within, and again, many of you I can see are from Pakistan, so you are knowledgeable about, but not part of, the Hindu caste system. So in the Hindu caste system, there is, of course, very strong attention paid to skin color. And this is not just a product of European colonial influences, although those played into it. Rather, these have been built up over time and have actually become increased. Let me elaborate. I've worked on skin color phenomena in India with colleagues from India and from Cambridge in the UK. And as part of this study, we looked at the range of skin colors in India. And what we found, it was that there was a remarkable lack of correspondence between ultraviolet radiation levels and skin color, but there was a remarkable correspondence between caste membership and skin color. And within any caste, there was also a lot of sexual difference, sexual dimorphism. And there was very strong preference, cultural preference, in marriage partners for lighter skin. So you alluded to the now well-known colorism and wide use of skin lighteners in South Asia. This is driven in part by these multiple cultural influences, very ancient ones and then more recent ones, that have favored a light skin which is considered sort of more virtuous, more moral from the sort of the ancient Vedic traditions, but then also considered more associated with a lack of outdoor activity, a lack of outdoor toil and labor, and higher status. So there are many different factors that play into light skin being considered better. Within any group, especially within any sort of closed marriage group, light skin, especially in female partners, is favored. And what we can discern at least in Indian populations, is that there has actually been an increase in sexual dimorphism over time. In other words, within especially the Brahmin caste, women have tended to get lighter, men have tended to get, lighter, but the difference between men and women has become greater. That is a cultural ratchet. Through repeated generations of mate choice, we actually have changed our appearance. So this is one of the really interesting aspects of human behavior, is that we can now manipulate, these biological phenomena in our own species.
Thanks. One correction. We mostly are from Bangladesh.
Yes,
so,
Bangladesh, sorry, not Pakistan.
And, but everything you said applies to our society as well.
Yes.
So, yeah. Anyone else from the audience wants to ask questions? Please go ahead. You can show your hands or just ask in the chat box.
Well, meanwhile, I'll ask a question which links to
Please.
what you were just discussing, that is there any particular instances of sexual selection working on skin? Maybe not specifically on skin color, but in
Yes. Well, first of all, there is sexual selection for skin color also in some other contexts. In Japan, we see the same thing going on. But in terms of other aspects of skin, you know, it's said that that there is an almost universal favoring of skin that looks even in color. So regardless of what the color is, if it looks more even, and also if it looks glowing, that this is preferred. Obviously, these are attributes that tend to be present more in young people, right, than in older people. So these sort of universal aspects of beauty, evenness of pigmentation, smoothness of skin, and you know, sort of a glowing ambience to the skin. These seem to be, you know, very much sought after. But, you know, in connection with other attributes, you know, facial hair, all these things, there's just tremendous amounts of variability. So, you know, these appearance counts for a lot, especially, you know, when we are younger and seeking mates. But we are culture-bearing primates. And so ultimately, we select more on cultural attributes than we do on appearance. So appearance can sort of get you in the door, but you still have to be sort of an engaging, nice person. And so this is what's so interesting and what really distinguishes us from some of our non-human relatives, is that relationships are built on a lot more than just appearance.
So we have a question from our audience on Facebook who's asking that we see relatively consistent difference between some ethnicities in terms of skin color,
Yes.
say Europeans and Africans. Are there other similar sort of consistent differences between ethnicities on other aspects of skin?
Actually, skin is remarkably uniform in its physiology across the human species. Color is the most conspicuous difference between people, but color is specified by, you know, a variety of different genes, and those tend to not influence other aspects of skin physiology. So we tend to have, you know, similar densities of sweat glands, similar sensitivity of the skin to touch and so forth, similar sensitivity to pain. So color is the single most variable attribute.
Anyone from the Zoom session wants to ask questions, please go ahead. Okay, you can think about your question right now. Okay.
I'll ask another question which has been raised, okay. Which is that is there any connection between skin color or skin traits and other traits which are usually made in terms of racist ideology, that's the intelligence or other aspects?
Yes, this is really important because, you know, and this really does come back to how sort of race ideation started to be well organized in 18th century Europe. These traits were put together and it was assumed that they were somehow, you know, sort of biologically associated. One of the most important discoveries of the modern era of 20th and 21st century genetics is that pigmentation and other traits that distinguish us are actually not closely related to one another, so that we don't have racial groups of genes that sort of travel together in populations. What we see are different features and attributes of human appearance that are encoded each by a wide variety of different genes. And these have varying frequencies as we go from one part of the world to another. So what we have referred to sort of classically as races, or that European naturalists and philosophers recognized, were the things that were brought to their attention in the middle of the 18th century. And they said, okay, your quintessential European person has light skin, a long cranium, blonde hair, and blue eyes. What they didn't know at that time was that these traits are not present in all Europeans, that Europeans are tremendously variable, and depending on where you go, you can have Europeans with dark hair, dark eyes, darker skin, so forth. So they didn't appreciate anything of the variation in all of these attributes. Further, they didn't appreciate that many of these traits have a geographical distribution. So, I mean, they missed the boat. They mischaracterized populations. And the worst thing is that they created these mental stereotypes that have shackled us for centuries, because the pronouncements of Kant and Hume and other philosophers, as well as the systematists of that era, like Linnaeus, these have had profound influence on how we think about human diversity and human distinctness or human unity. So, you know, I would like to sort of go back and just get a big eraser and just take out a lot of these concepts, because these traits, pigmentation, hair, nose shape, face shape, body form, are all separate. They travel independently genetically, and we can find groups around the world that have different distributions of these traits.
There is a question, actually multiple people asked about it, and you also discussed about it in your book in the chapter Future Skin. Yeah. They're asking, how will we look like in future in terms of skin? I want to add with this that there is more mixing happening because of the globalization. We travel more and meet more people, we mix together, we go to a different place, we start living there. That these kind of mixing much was not happening before, like any time in the history of the world. So what do you think, how people may look like in future? Yeah.
Yes, I think you've already answered this insofar as I think in many of the urban centers, or, you know, of various sizes, there will be more mixture. So there will be more intermediate skin tones, more intermediate hair textures, and so forth. And that will be interesting in itself. I think there will still be very rural parts of the world in which there will be, you know, sort of older isolated populations that look more like the ancestral populations from which we came centuries and millennia ago. So I think there will be a more of an interesting sort of urban-rural divide in this way. But I think one of the interesting things that will happen with respect to the future is that we will continue to devise new ways to decorate the skin. You know, we're very familiar now with the very widespread practice of tattooing, and we see lots of people your age that are, you know, covered with tattoos, and a variety of tattoos, and that are very meaningful to them. I think this will continue to be an important trend, but that there will be more in the way of sort of temporary tattoos, tattoos that fade with time, or tattoos that are applied but that can fade under specific wavelengths of light, for instance, so that it's no longer this lifelong commitment to having this tattoo of your girlfriend or boyfriend's name on you or whatever, that you can get rid of this without a lot of expensive surgery. I think there will also be a lot of really interesting cutaneous sensors and implants that we begin to live with that constantly monitor our internal condition, our glucose levels, our temperature, and so forth. These will simply be, sort of a normal part of our daily lives. We don't think about them as being exceptional. And our healthcare practitioners will have access to these data. So I think we'll become, more wired automatically in our skin, but also more decorated in many, many interesting ways.
Thanks.
We'll ask a couple of sort of personal questions to you.
Yes.
And the first is that we have a lot of aspiring women scientists in our
Yes.
audience. So as an eminent women scientist yourself, do you have anything to say to them?
I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is that you have to, well, the two things, you have to love what you do. If you love it, then a day of work or a day of disappointment in science is just, it's just part of life, and you get over it. And you have a greater vision of the enjoyment of your life in science to propel you forward. I have always loved being a scientist. Long before I sort of called myself a scientist, when I was a little kid, I was a scientist. I enjoyed it. I still am a little kid. That's how I think of myself. The other thing is, and this I think is extremely important for everyone, but most especially for women, is to not be cowed by disappointment. I think it is easy, especially in eras of, hasty peer review, to often feel just demolished by a terrible peer review of a paper, especially early in your career. And you feel, sort of personally sort of torn asunder and attacked. And to recognize that, that the people undertaking the peer reviews often have many of their own problems and issues, and they're trying their best, and that you just have to keep the faith in yourself and continue to enjoy your own work, and just, be methodical about moving through some of these painful tasks. So I think enjoying things, and then being like, being just a steady force of nature, keeping moving. Don't be put off by the fact that a project may take some years. I routinely am, working on year 7 of a 15-year project or something. I don't shy away from these things because I love it, and I want to work with people, and I think that the satisfaction that is gained from the work is inestimable. So it can be just a tremendous augmentation to your personal life. It doesn't have to detract from it. It can be a central part of being a human being.
Just to add with it, we in our country, the girls who are potential scientists, they face completely different kind of struggles. For example, if they want to come as a graduate student in a country like US, Canada, Australia, or Japan, anywhere, their family would not let them to go there, and sometimes they are asked to get married first and take your husband with it with you. So these kind of resistances happen a lot of times. People talk to me many times about this. But the thing is, if there is a role model like you in front of them, they can show to their society, their parents, that, okay, look at Dr. Nina Jablonski, and I want to be like her. So
You know, it's also important for men, for brothers, fathers, and husbands to recognize that, you know, different societies have different norms, and that fathers and husbands and brothers can be tremendously transformative in the life of a young woman scientist. That if she has aspirations, one of the things that the men in her life can do is help to support those in a constructive way and in a consistent way, day in and day out. That doesn't mean undermining the beauty of the family and the harmony of relationships, nothing like that, but that you can make compromises through discussion and good communication every day. And these can terrifically change the life of, you know, of young, motivated people. And so, you know, I would advance to, you know, to all of you, you know, young men and young women, be supportive of one another. Don't undercut one another, and recognize that your traditional culture tends to not be so egalitarian, and so that you must make your own personal modifications in order to make this work. These things are possible. You know, we see these, you know, wonderful examples of, you know, of women from Bangladesh, from Pakistan, from, you know, from many similar cultural backgrounds who are making terrific impacts, and they don't do it all by themselves. They often do it because they have a terrifically supportive set of parents, especially a father. Usually there's a brother somewhere, and then as they get older, there is a supportive husband, someone who does not feel challenged by having a woman scientist in the family, but rather enjoys it, loves it, loves the stimulating discussion and involvement of, you know, of a woman partner in a really rewarding intellectual endeavor. So that's what I would, you know, encourage you all to work toward, because I think this will really conduce to a great level of happiness as well as societal satisfaction over time.
Thanks. Along with it, I was going to ask you, I should have asked before about your writing. What motivates you to write books? That's one question. And also, I see, because I write blogs and I see science blogs, and then I see very little, I mean, the number of girls writing about science is not as many as how many men write. Especially from our society, in our language. I'm wondering, is this related to the resistance that we put on them pursuing science, developing a career in science, doing research, and they don't get motivated to write about any of those things?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I write for the general public as well as scientific sort of heavy papers, because I love to communicate with people. And I think some of the things that I do research on are broadly applicable to a wide variety of people and helpful. I also enjoy writing, like I enjoy lecturing in this way. I think with respect to young women in science who are, you know, writing and blogging or thinking about blogging, they feel an intense pressure to just do the science well and to concentrate on that. And the other things, sort of the communication, a broader communication of science, can wait. Those things can wait till later. Also, I mean, sad to say, there's just a terrific amount of bullying of young women that goes on, you know, in blogs, not necessarily so much in the life sciences, but certainly young women who are blogging on political science and broader social issues have to deal with a terrific amount of, you know, negative and sometimes very harmful content. And a lot of young women just say, I don't need this, you know, I'll do this at some point when I have more time and I'm better equipped. And so they'll often just concentrate on the tasks at hand and not, enter into what could be potentially, a very injurious or at least energy consuming, set of discussions.
Nazia, you wanted to ask any question?
Hi, not really. I was just agreeing to what Nina said right now about women feeling nervous.
Yes.
And, they don't find for writing or publishing stuff. Rather than that, they like to just work and work and work, because despite not being a scientist, I have to agree with that, because I have seen people, I have done that myself, work tenfold compared to a man in a similar position, just to prove my capabilities. So
yes.
I know that that's the same across the disciplines. So it's 2020, and it's sad that we still have to do it. That's all.
Yes.
And it's a fascinating talk. It's amazing. Great to listen to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nazia. Yeah, I think the important thing too is to, continue to work, but continue to be good-humored and compassionate, because all of our colleagues, young men, young women, all are going through some struggles that we will never understand. And so, the more that we can bring not only an ethos of hard work, but also equanimity to our work, to our interactions, I think this will just help us all. So it's important to be persistent, it's important to excel, but it's also important always to be a compassionate person.
Very true. Very, very true. Thank you.
Nina, a lot of the things that we discussed today are kind of basic questions that probably people should know about automatically, like the connection between diversity in skin color and other aspects like intelligence and so on. But, and all of these have been recently came into attention again in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Yes.
And so on. So as a scientist and as someone who does public engagement around the research, what do you think scientists could do?
Well, I think what we need to do is not give up. First of all, we need to sort of continue. I need to practice what I preach, but also I think it's very important that we not shy away from public engagement. And at a time like this, I can tell you, almost every day I'm engaging with some group in some blog or podcast or something, because people want to hear about the biology of skin color or the history of race concepts. I think it is important now that we seize this opportunity and that we don't just sit back and say, oh, I could do this next week or next month, that we make this a punctuation in our own scientific lives and take the opportunity to engage very deliberately. And one of the ways in which we're engaging is to try to really have more of an impact on science foundations that are funding scientific research and new avenues of, both general science and clinical medical exploration, because ultimately change will come as a result of grassroots implementation of more sort of enlightened or let's say research that is informed by up-to-date concepts of human diversity. So I see a very positive trend in this way that simply has to be sustained. I am under no illusions that this is going to happen quickly. This is going to take decades generations even. It has taken us a long time to get into this mess, and it will take us quite a long time to get out of it. But I think we can do it. And so I see our responsibility as scientists is to simply seize the moment, have energy, have vision, and don't be discouraged, and move with others to see the scientific funding organizations help to support a sea change in the way people are educated and the research base of human diversity.
We have a question from the audience. Is asking about the possibility of these things known as genetic engineering or designer babies. That is there any possibility that in future we will be able to change our skin color easily?
Yes, almost certainly. You know, there will be this possibility. You know, and again, I wish that people didn't have to worry about this. You know, they didn't have to worry about thinking, you know, I want a baby of a particular color or with particular eyes or ear shape or whatever. I mean, it would be much better if people were concentrating on other attributes of bringing up a healthy infant, regardless of their appearance. But that doesn't answer the question. There will be the ability. The question is, how will this be regulated? Where will it be done? Almost certainly it is being attempted now, even though people aren't talking about it. I would be surprised if it weren't being, you know, attempted in less regulated medical systems. So, you know, I think it will happen, but what we can attend to is the fallacy of undertaking this, and the inherent value of appreciating humans as they are, and recognizing also that the manipulation of genes does not necessarily produce a deterministic result. A very famous example here, when some years ago, when a wealthy man wanted to clone his favorite dog, and he managed to clone his dog, you know, very, very expensive. It cost him $75,000 or something to clone his dog. And he said, yeah, the dog is similar to my old dog, but not identical. Well, lo and behold, you can have the same genes, but not necessarily the same behavioral phenotype or the same appearance, because of all of the different environmental influences, the so-called epigenetic influences that ultimately impact the expression of genes. So people can CRISPR themselves out of existence, you know, metaphorically speaking, but they still will not be able to predetermine the outcomes in any precise way.
I mean, people fear that because in our side of the world, a lot of people try to be light-skinned.
Yes.
And there are products, beauty products,
Yes,
that say that will make you light-skinned. And if something technology allows you to make lighter
yes,
skinned babies,
yes.
would that be a huge business in those countries, and that would be immoral in different ways?
Yes, and I think, you know, government regulatory agencies would need to be extremely attentive to these things. And I would think that they already are being very attentive, because they recognize the social desirability of this attribute, and they recognize that the technology is up and coming. I know that, you know, throughout all of South Asia and in East Asia, there is tremendous amounts of government regulation that is, you know, being trained on, you know, CRISPR technologies that could be applied to alteration of human appearance. So yes, it would be seen as desirable. It would be lamentable if it occurred. But I think very, very importantly, governments are going to make this thank goodness, enormously difficult to happen in any kind of widespread or practical implementation, as they should.
In your work with skin color, which is a quite sensitive topic, especially in America,
Yes.
have you received not necessarily pushback, but kind of conversations with white supremacists who are trying to adopt your research into their agenda?
You know, people look at our research and they can read whatever they want into it. And we've seen, our research featured on some white supremacist websites as well as Black nationalist websites. So people take what they want and we can't stop them from doing that. But what our research is all about is that color has no inherent value. It has no inherent cultural or moral value. It represents an adaptation to different levels of ultraviolet radiation that were experienced by our ancestors generations ago. And that's it. Period. End of story. It's not related to other physical or behavioral or cultural attributes. So, people can apply it, misapply it, in their own personal belief systems or in their groups' belief systems. But the simple, inescapable fact is that we have this variable trait, and the trait is related to ultraviolet radiation. And that's the contribution of our research, that one sentence. So it's a simple explanation that people have put a lot of cultural value on. And what we always hasten to add is that it's not related to other traits, and you can put as much cultural value on it as you want, but the ultimate meaning of it is an adaptation to ultraviolet radiation levels in the lands of your ancestors.
Thanks. I will ask for a few more minutes. That should be okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just wondering what are the things we can do to increase the acceptance of human diversity in different societies. USA, especially, the society is unique in a sense that we who are living in the US got exposed to different kinds of people in our society from different parts of the world. People come here, work, live, and stay, travel. So we see different kind of people, but in some parts of the world, that much exposure are not happening.
Yes.
But it's a world of a time of globalization now. The cultural diversity we can see from distance. We can see in the TV, in the internet, that different kinds of people live. There exist. There are different kinds of cultures, rituals. But if somebody different lives in as my neighbor, I get more resistant to that. So there's a gap between societies of acceptance of diversity. How do you propose? What do you propose to increase the acceptance in different societies?
Well, if I could answer that in a simple question, I would probably be the head of the UN or some other major organization. Instead, I'm just a little professor in a small college town. But I think what we can all do in our lives is be good communicators. And as I was saying to Nazia earlier, not only be a good communicator and be compassionate, but meet others where they are. Your neighbor, the person on the MTR, the person in your building or whatever, or in the supermarket. Engage with people meaningfully. Engage with them regardless of what they look like, because everyone has a story. And so I think probably the most important element of this on a sort of a granular day-to-day basis is to as they say, don't judge a book by its cover. Just because you happen to be in a particular social environment and somebody else seems to be in a different social environment, don't judge them on the basis of their environment or their appearance. And I think when you actually examine what's going on in your own head, when you behold another person, you recognize that there is this sort of period of sort of immediate sort of visual contact, and then a level of assessment, and then a level of judgment, right? You can almost feel sort of the wheels turning in a matter of tenths of seconds. To be more aware of that process, to be more aware of the kinds of lenses or biases that you are using is really an important part of this whole process that you're talking about. Because when you do that and you recognize, oh, I've ignored this person because they seem to have a bad attitude, or they're older or younger or fatter or skinnier or whatever. I think when we recognize these sort of mini prejudices in ourselves, we can disarm them, or at least be more aware of them and begin to disarm them. So I think that's an important responsibility that we all have, especially those of us who live in complex, multicultural cities, where we meet people of all appearances, all cultural backgrounds, and so forth. People who live in more isolated and generally more rural situations sort of don't have to worry about that as much. But those of us who live in, let's say, a university town like you do, have to think about this every day. And so to be aware of sort of one's own sort of mental concomitants, one's own biasing behaviors, I think becomes an important part of mental health and ultimately of happiness.
Yeah, very nicely put. Thanks. If anyone else has any question, please ask. Otherwise, we are very close to the end of our discussion today. Kaustubh, do you have any more question?
No, I think this is a nice point to wrap up the discussion.
Cool. So I would like to thank Dr. Nina Jablonski for joining us today in our discussion. It was very enlightening, encouraging for us, and we thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. Thank you very much.
And I enjoyed it also. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you,
Take care.
Nina.
Enjoy your skin.